Hello and welcome back. And here we are. We've got PDC Chief Exec Matt Porter. Matt, thanks for joining us. It's been a while.
It seems a long time ago, doesn't it? It's time's not flying at the moment.
No, when we last spoke in Liverpool Premier League, did you ever envisage that this was going to happen? It was going to be as bad as what it was?
No, I mean there was a snowball effect, wasn't there? Really, obviously, people at the time were talking about should the Six Nations have taken place, should Cheltenham have taken place, should Liverpool v Atletico Madrid have taken place, and all those sort of things. And then we had Premier League darts that night in Liverpool. And what was quite interesting was that we had a good couple of thousand people didn't show who had tickets. The crowd was quite low that night, and that maybe gave a little indication of what public feeling was about. People getting a bit nervous and whatever. Normally you only get a handful of people with a ticket who don't attend, but that night it was really significant number. And then I think it was Mikel Arteta tested positive, football got cancelled, and then it all just felt like a house of cards, didn't it? But
yeah,
who thought we'd be sat here 3 months later, almost 3 months to the day later, still in a similar position.
I was going to say that weekend as well, you talked about snowball, and I remember the Pro Tour, people like Roby John Rodriguez having to pull out mid-Pro Tour because if he didn't catch that flight, he wasn't getting home.
Yeah, that was pretty dramatic, wasn't it? There was a couple of the Eastern European lads, Spaniards, Roby, as you say, a few others, and then it became obvious then that, we were going to have to pull the plug as well, which was a shame because, we were hoping obviously to have continued, but once it got to a position where it could be deemed to not be safe, then clearly that decision's made for you.
When that moment was made, did you have any contingency plans there and then, or was it, right, okay, we need to sit down and plan this properly,
We'd been working with Premier League venues to get backup dates in place early. We hadn't looked as far ahead of as the match play by then because clearly that was 4 months away or whatever it was. But we soon were onto them, of course. And the same with tour events with our venues there. So, those sort of things we were able to move quite quickly for, and that was why we've been able to pretty much rewrite our calendar. We obviously haven't released that yet in full because we don't know what's going to take place. We don't want to confuse people, give people false hope or whatever. But nevertheless, we were able to work quickly and restore most of the events to the calendar in some way, shape or form. Clearly 3 months down the line, we haven't restarted yet, although hopefully we do soon. The position may have to change again.
Yeah, we'll come on to the start soon shortly. But the match play, was that massive for you that it went ahead in the original dates because of everything that snowboards after that if it doesn't?
Yeah, I think if you look at our calendar after the match play, because we cancelled the World Series for this year, the majority of the World Series, after the match play, we had a little bit of breathing space until the autumn. So that became really important that we staged in July, because if we didn't, then there wouldn't really, be any darts until the autumn with the rearranged Premier League nights or World Grand Prix or whatever. So the match play obviously is prestigious. It's an event everybody loves, and of course we want to play it anyway. But I think the fact that once the Premier League nights all gone, had we not played the match play, there would have been a real almost half a year of no darts. Yeah. And it became more important that we played it than ever.
Before we get on to the rest of the calendar, the home tour, you must be over the moon with the way that transpired and how everyone got on board with it so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, look, as you've known yourself, Phil, these remote darts events take a lot of effort, a lot of learning, a lot of flexibility, a lot of thinking on your feet, and a lot of winging it a lot, some of the time. And that's what this period's all been about, because none of us have ever been through it before, and hopefully we never have to again. But the home tour was great for us because it gave so many players the opportunity to play some form of competitive, if you like, darts. And at a time when self-employed dart players are not able to go out there and ply their trade, it was good that we were able to give them something to practice for. And it's been really warming to hear the comments of people like Joe Cullen and others who said they weren't really looking forward to it. Gary Anderson, another one, but actually they were really glad that they played it, and that was good. And we were really glad that they did too. And obviously some players couldn't for various reasons, and we respect that. But to have over 101 players in total from 16 different countries over 43 nights was phenomenal.
Out of the ones that didn't, obviously, like you said, there was ones that genuinely couldn't, but the ones that just didn't want to, was that a little bit disappointing that they didn't, considering giving the fans back something?
Yeah, do you know what? I think it's only disappointing for them. I don't think it made the event poorer. I don't think, ultimately in the end people missed them. I think players have to realise that it's like anything you do when you're in the public eye. You're you can be quickly forgotten, and I'm not suggesting anybody's going to be forgotten because they didn't play in the home tour, but some of those players that were in it managed to keep their name rolling over a little bit. Now that'll be more important for some than others, and a lot of the guys will obviously be hoping that they can be back on the big stage sooner rather than later. But you need to have something to focus on. You need to have a reason to get out of bed and practice in the morning. You need to have a reason to want to be competitive, to want to win. And the home tour did provide that. But in all honesty, I don't think there were more than a single figure number of players who actually just thought, no, I don't fancy it. I think the vast majority of people either had genuine space or connection issues, or a house full of dogs that they had to look after, or they were working still. Don't forget, not all of the players are full time. So some of the guys who earn a living as well elsewhere still had their own jobs to do. So 95% of people who didn't take part in it had a very valid reason for not doing so, and we respect that.
So about 5.5 weeks to the match play. I know Barry said on Twitter that hopefully we're going to announce some Pro Tour stuff this week. Realistically, how many Pro Tours would you like to try and get in before the match play to make the qualifying criteria a little bit level, considering we've missed so much?
I mean, we'll have missed 10 Players' Championship events plus a handful of European Tour events. We can't do anything about the European Tour events because of the nature of those. They're ticketed events that take place in different towns. We're hoping to get a block of Pro Tour events staged. A lot of that will depend on UK quarantine rules and things like that. We were supposed to have 10 Players' Championships. It won't be 10, but I think if we could get around half that played, then that would be pretty legitimate.
I know, again, Barry speaking to RTL, he's quite hopeful that sports stars will be granted exemption from the quarantine. With your chats from the government, do you think that will happen?
Yeah, I mean, we know of precedent. I think the West Indies cricket team flew into England a couple of days ago, and they will be self-isolating in a bubble, if you like, for what we understand. And there'll be other sports people looking to do the same, whether it's cricketers, golfers, some Premier League footballers may have only just come back, not too long ago, or Championship footballers. There may be Formula One drivers, snooker players, boxers, whatever, all coming into the country over the next few weeks ahead. And if they're entitled to earn a living, then dart players are entitled to earn a living as well. So it can't be one rule for one and one rule for another. It has to be applied consistently. And we believe that we can put in place a bubble, a quarantine, sort of self-isolated environment where the event can take place and people can live. And if we can do that, then we believe that's reason enough, along with a rigorous testing program, that we shouldn't have to have our players, go and hire a hotel room for 2 weeks or rent an empty flat or something silly like that.
Before we carry on with the darts, just the sports you touched on there, you must have been juggling so much, because obviously it's not just darts, it's obviously the board at Orient, the boxing, the snooker, and everything else that Matchroom does in the sporting world. Has that been quite difficult to juggle all the sports?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously got operational teams across everything. So, I've been across certain things, but not, necessarily hands-on 24/7 with them. But I worked very, very closely with the guys at World Snooker and at Matchroom for the Snooker Championship League, which is on now.
Yeah.
And they're following a very similar model to what we intended to do, and we developed a lot of it together. Just so happens that their scheduling meant that their event was first, but there's fundamentally very little difference between what they're doing and what we're looking to achieve. So we're fortunate in that snooker and darts are sports that can be played with social distancing. So there's an ability to take them forward. Boxing's obviously more of a challenge, but Eddie's got some great plans to do it at Maskell's at our headquarters, and hopefully they can come off. On the football side, it's obviously extremely difficult. The Football League, the lower leagues won't play again this year, as it's been announced. And for them, behind closed doors really isn't a financially viable option. They can talk about streaming revenue, and there will be some element of that. But to start to play a large proportion of matches behind closed doors for small clubs would be financially extremely destructive.
No, I 100% agree. Now, just moving on to the match play, I know that there's still some hope that it might be at the Winter Gardens with a very limited crowd, but I think realistically, most of us are accepting the match play is going to be behind closed doors. With the way, like you've touched on World Snooker, is MK the front runner to hold the match play as like almost a Matchroom hub?
Well, yeah, the Marshall Arena is a perfect location for a bubble venue. Hotel on site, good arena on site, excellent transport links, centrally located. We get on very well with the management team here. They're fully on board with what we're trying to achieve. So yeah, I mean, it's a venue that we know works for darts in normal circumstances, and we believe could work for darts as well in abnormal circumstances.
When do you think the government will make a decision on sporting events in July?
The 4th of July, we understand, but that's only from public announcements. We don't have any specific inside information, although DCMS are being very cooperative and communicative with us. But yeah, we understand that on the 4th of July will be an announcement regarding public gathering, extension of public gatherings and licensed events, if you like, because in a way, something like the Winter Gardens falls more under the licensed trade, like a pub or a restaurant, than it does under a sports stadium. And they're covered by different legislation. But you would expect if a pub was allowed to be open with certain criteria, then the basis of coming in, having a seat, going to the bar, going to the toilet, going to get food, going back to your seat, going home again, that's pretty much what you do at the Winter Gardens. The fact that there's live entertainment on, well, there might be a band on in the pub.
Yeah.
It is, when you think about it like that, it's very similar. And although there are some similarities with a sports stadium in the traditional sense, like you see behind me in Rotterdam or football stadium or whatever, then there are more similarities, we believe, with the licensed trade.
Again, I just want to touch on like the rankings and that. I know when one of your interviews you gave a few weeks ago, you said there was discussions with the PDPA. Has anything been agreed yet on the events that don't take part? Will that money come off players' rankings, or will it be held? And
we've not agreed. I'd say we've not agreed makes it sound like we're disagreeing. We're not disagreeing. We haven't come to a joint decision yet because we don't know the extent of the cancellations.
Yeah.
The extent of the cancellations will dictate what we do with regards to players retaining or losing money. Clearly, if everything is lost between now and the end of the year, which we're very hopeful it won't be, but if it was to be, then that would put us in an extremely difficult position, and players' rankings will be decimated. If we're able to catch up a large proportion of events, then we would hope to stick as closely as possible to the prescribed rules as they are at the moment. As we don't know what that's going to be like yet, we're going to wait until we know what it's going to be like before we make that commitment.
And again, just looking, I know that you said you're not looking more than 8 weeks in advance, but things like the World Series finals, with no World Series events, is that going to become a standalone event, or is it going to be?
I mean, it's a non-ranked event, so it's kind of standalone anyway, isn't it? Really, I know players qualify for it from the World Series, but who was going to be in the World Series events, a lot of them anyway. So those players would be there, and we would make appropriate invitations and then hold a qualifying event. So there wouldn't really be a huge amount of difference for something like that. I think when you've got a non-ranked event like that in the World Cup, you do have the flexibility to be a little bit more flexible with the selection, because it has less impact on the wider darts world. But obviously, when it's a ranked event, then you need to make sure that it's a really rigid and fair system.
Speaking of that, one of those ones that could fall into that bracket is the European Championship finals, with losing so many Euro Tours. Is that just going to be a case of whatever Euro Tour events are played, that's the qualifying criteria, or will it be tweaked slightly?
Yeah, possibly. We're looking at all options for that at the moment because, as you say, we will lose a lot of European Tour events. The key will be whether we lose even more. I think we've still got a few hanging on to the calendar. So let's hope that they stay that way. But we wouldn't want to get to a point where, Hasselt, basically the last top 32 from Hasselt became the European Championship qualifiers. That just would be pointless, So we'll see. We also don't really know, if we can't do events where all 128 players can get there, then it's very difficult for us to do qualifiers as well as ranking events. So we need answers to this. We need clarity. Once we have that clarity, then we can put rule adjustments in place quite quickly.
Speaking of like the 128 tour card holders, is there a number that you'd run something with?
We've talked about that, and we haven't come to a final decision on it yet, although we have done a lot of research with the PDPA, our admin team. We've done quite a lot of research with the PDPA on how non-UK players would travel into the UK, assuming they were allowed to.
Yeah.
And actually, you can still get a flight, and the flights are very cheap, so it's relatively straightforward to travel to the UK through your normal route at the moment. We don't believe there's any players really who would be completely unable to do so. There might be a couple who might need to go through some paperwork procedures to do so from their home countries. But ultimately, we think with enough notice that everybody can get in. If somebody chooses not to come in, then that's sort of hard luck, really. That's down to them. And we would respect the fact that they would not feel safe doing so, or they'd have other reasons for not doing so, if they have to look after a family member or something like that. But as I've said in other interviews, we've got an obligation to 128 tour card holders en masse as a group. And we can't leave 124 of them sat at home because 4 guys can't make it.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds pretty ruthless, but it's the reality. You have to look after the mass, and hopefully it won't come to that. Hopefully everybody can and will want to travel. And if somebody just says, look, I'm not doing very well on the rankings, it's going to cost me a few quid, I don't fancy my chances of winning many games, then fair enough. You don't need to bother. But everybody who wants to come, if they can come, then that's clearly the ideal scenario for us.
Just want to touch on the Grand Prix and the Slam as well while we're talking about tournaments. Is there a venue been identified for potentially the Grand Prix? Because reading the
City West in Dublin.
Isn't it out of commission though? When you read the Irish
No,
press?
I mean, no, it's not. It was used as similar to how we had Nightingale hospitals in the UK. It was used for that basis, but the initial lease period is only to the end of August. So we are talking regularly to the City West, and we're still hopeful of being able to take the event there if Irish government regulations allow. And if not, then we'll find somewhere else if we can go to Ireland, and they've been open with us about that and whatever. But we actually believe that, assuming the Irish numbers carry on going the right way, that the Irish Health Authority will be out of the City West in time for us to return. Might be tight, might only be by a few days, but that's all you need.
But if worst case, if the City West was out of commission, you'd look to keep the Grand Prix in Ireland.
It's the same with anything. If it's a case of doing the event somewhere where we don't really want to do it or not doing it, then we'll do it somewhere where we don't really want to do it. So it's too early to answer that, really. We're 4 months away from the event, so let's wait and see what happens. We're in constant communication with the City West, and our intention and our preference is to stage the event at the City West this year.
No, that's fair. And the other one is the Grand Slam qualifying criteria. Has that been nailed down yet? Because I know at the start of the year it was still under review.
You can't nail it down because you don't know what's going to happen between now and then. I know you want answers to these things, but you have to understand I can't give you them because we don't know when we can start and what we can play.
No,
when we know that, then we know what we can put in place. Go on,
yeah, I just wondered because even before this in March, the qualifying criteria wasn't set, was it, before we finished? So I just wondered if it had been set before then and just wasn't released.
Yeah, I think that's the case, really. I think it's probably just got lost in everything that's happened since, and now it's pointless announcing it because we don't know what's going to take place. Like already, the World Cup is only going to be a week before the Grand Slam, so is that practical to include that still? If the European Championship goes, if the Premier League doesn't finish, if clearly we've lost a lot of European Tour events, there's all these things that might mean that there's only 6 players in the Grand Slam, so the BDO don't look like they're doing they don't look like they're going to do anything this year, which is fair enough. So there's going to be loads of criteria that are going to be needing to be changed, and people will need to understand that decisions might have to be made last minute. They might have to be made and then changed, and that's one of the reasons we're not making early announcements, because we don't want to announce something now in June and then come out again in August and have to change it, and then come out again in September and have to change it again, and then in October and have to change it again. We'd rather announce it once and it was final. So we've got our fingers on the ball. We're talking to everybody we need to talk to, and we're ready to go. As soon as we know what we can do.
Yeah, that's right. It was more a case of like, because it wasn't announced even before we finished. That was
No, fair enough. Yeah.
Also, as well, a lot of talk about Challenge Tour and Development Tour. Is it fair to say that we might not see them return this year with everything that's going on?
Possibly. Again, we'd like to stage, if we could stage a little bit more of each one, it'd be very difficult to complete them, but, that might be tough. Again, it all depends. Look, if we have to stage Pro Tour events in an isolation bubble where people have to come and be tested, and we have to spend tens and tens of thousands of pounds on testing and accommodation for players and whatever, then that is one thing. Doing that for the Challenge Tour and the Development Tour is clearly a different scenario. Yeah. So we would look to make sure that if those tours are curtailed early, that nobody's disadvantaged in terms of any sort of loss of qualification or anything like that. But we would hope to put more events on, but our first priority would be to stage obviously the Premier events and then the Pro Tour where possible.
With the events behind closed doors, would you do the Premier League nights behind closed door? Or is that almost a no-no because of what the Premier League is about?
No, we'd do anything behind closed doors if we had to. I think initially we said it doesn't work behind closed doors, and it probably doesn't. But it's better to do it. We've come to the sort of decision that it's better to do it than not do it. If you speak to players, if you speak to the sponsors, broadcasters, fans, people will want to see it. It might not be in the same vein, but technology's come on a lot in the last 3 or 4 months as well, as you've found out yourself. So there's things that you can do. We're looking at what football clubs are doing, what rugby is doing in Australia. And there'll be ways to artificially enhance the atmosphere, and that will make it a better viewing experience. And that's something that we'd certainly consider. Obviously, we'd rather have this situation behind me. 9,000 screaming Dutchmen and women in Rotterdam, but clearly that's going to be a challenge. So if we have to do it behind closed doors, then we will do. It's just obviously not our first choice.
Again, just a couple of little bits here and there now for you, Matt. I don't know if you saw the interview with Corey Cadby. A very big apology to yourself and the PDC for last year. Is that a good thing for darts, that it looks like he's now on the right track and sorted his head and life out?
It'd be great if he backs it up with actions. I think Corey can be a lovely lad, and I think he's got an unbelievable amount of talent. But he's got to keep his head screwed on. He's got to believe what he says, and he's got to do what he says, and only he can dictate that.
No, yeah, I 100% agree. And it's the first time I've seen him in that place where, even when he came over last year, I don't think he was in that place that he is now. And it was nice for him to get everything off his chest, I think.
I think you're right. And, Corey's obviously a big talker and he's very confident and everything like that. But maybe don't just keep telling everyone you're going to be world champion within 2 years. Maybe concentrate on getting on the Pro Tour again and staying on it within 2 years. That might be the first obstacle that he needs to overcome. And if he sees this, he'll know why I'm saying that, and he'll know that I want him to do that. As I say, he's the only one who can make that happen. So come on, Corey, you can do it. Just prove it to yourself and prove it to everybody else.
I'm guessing, I know we're looking long term, I know we don't know all the answers, but I'm guessing you're hoping that 2021 will start as 2020 did, and we'll just have a complete perfect year.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, 2020 had started brilliant, hadn't it? The standard was phenomenal, and the Premier League was thrilling every week. Peter Wright was becoming the man to beat, and whatever. So, it was a real shame that it came to a halt like that. Now, hopefully, again, I think we've always said since the start, if we can start again around July time, then we think we can salvage the majority of the year. So let's hope with the match play behind closed doors or slim chance of a crowd, let's hope that we can kick on from there.
Last one for me, Matt, as well. Things like the Champions League that have obviously gone this year because it's non-ranked. Can we expect to see that back, or has that been canned for good?
Maybe. No, I mean, you wouldn't ever can anything for good, but a lot of it will depend on how we return to normality. And if the Champions League worked for what it was supposed to achieve, which was, good coverage on the BBC, which was a tremendous feather in our cap, and hopefully we can restore that one day. If we can't, then fair enough. It served a purpose in its time. And we'll move on, and maybe something else new will come about. Maybe we'll consolidate, whatever. But we won't be too worried about that at the moment. Our main focus is getting the rest of 2020, completed in as best and normal a way as possible.
Matt, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for your time as always.
No problem. Really enjoyed it. Stay well, guys. Stay well.